17-year-old Heidi Dutton sent her boyfriend a chilling request. She wanted them gone. Heidi Dutton was a teenager from Oklahoma. She was raised by her adoptive grandparents, Deborah and Larry Dutton. Both had served in the Air Force as staff sergeants before retiring. Later, Larry worked as an airport manager, and Deborah became a chef. They officially adopted Heidi and brought her up as their own daughter. Their home was built on strong family ties, and it should have been a safe and supportive place. But instead, it became the setting for something very troubling. On the outside, Heidi's life appeared normal. She even earned the rank of Eagle Scout shortly before everything happened. But beneath the surface, her life was moving in another direction. In December of 2022, when Heidi was 17, she contacted her boyfriend, Lucas Walker. She asked him to harm her grandparents. According to investigators, Heidi's message to Lucas was unmistakable. She no longer wanted her grandparents around. On the night of December 19th, Lucas took a small caliber pistol from the Duttons' garage. He waited outside their bedroom. When Deborah opened the door, he shot her in the face. He then cut her throat. Larry, alarmed by the sound, rushed into the room. Lucas tried to fire the gun again, but it jammed. With the weapon no longer working, he used a blade and struck Larry multiple times in the face. Afterward, both grandparents were wrapped in bedsheets and dragged out of the house. The moment was caught on the family's Ring security camera. The two were buried in a shallow grave in the backyard. Authorities only discovered the situation about a month later. On January 20th, 2023, officers arrived for a welfare check. Inside the home, they noticed red spots under the bedroom baseboards and a strong smell of cleaning chemicals, likely bleach. Soon after, Heidi and Lucas were taken into custody. Both admitted what they had done. Lucas confessed to carrying out the acts, while Heidi confirmed it was her idea. In May of 2025, Heidi entered a guilty plea. She admitted to 2 counts of first-degree unlawful taking of life, along with conspiracy, and 2 counts related to mishandling of remains. On June 6, 2025, the judge accepted the jury's recommendation. Heidi was sentenced to life in prison. Her other convictions, including conspiracy and mishandling of remains, were set to run at the same time as her life sentence. Lucas Walker faced his own trial in federal court because of his Cherokee Nation status. He was given a 35-year sentence for second-degree unlawful taking of life in Indian country. Heidi plotted to end the people who raised her. But what can push a teen to pick a complete stranger as a target? Chancey Allen Luna was born in 1997. At the time of the incident, he was living in Stevens County, Oklahoma. His mother, Jennifer Luna, spoke during the trial. She explained that Chancey had lived with her parents for much of his childhood. His father was in prison, and she admitted, "I wasn't there half the time." This shows he grew up in a very unstable environment. As he got older, Chancey showed signs of being involved with a street gang known as the Rollin' 90s Crips. It was also reported that he was involved in selling illegal substances before the shooting. His upbringing was scattered and unstable, which added to the challenges he faced. On August 16, 2013, a young man named Christopher Lane was jogging in Duncan, Oklahoma. He was 22 years old and came from Australia. He was a catcher on a baseball scholarship at East Central University. At the time, he was staying near his girlfriend's family home and preparing for his senior year. While he was jogging, a car drove past him. Michael Dwayne Jones was behind the wheel. Chancey was in the back seat. He fired a .22 caliber revolver toward Christopher. Christopher collapsed near the roadside and passed away within about 10 minutes. Investigators later shared what they believed was the reason behind the act. When Christopher passed the car, one of the teens reportedly said, "There's our target." Another teen later admitted, "We were bored and didn't have anything to do, so we decided to hurt somebody." This raised questions about what really drove the act. Was it just reckless youth? Or was it tied to something deeper, like gang influence? The trial showed pieces of both. The boredom explanation made it sound like immaturity, but the gang links and substance activity hinted at darker influences. In April 2015, Chancey Luna was tried as an adult in Stevens County. His defense argued that he only meant to scare Christopher, not take his life. The jury did not believe this. They found him guilty and gave him a sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole. At the sentencing in June 2015, the judge described the situation as a tragedy. Chancey, in shackles, was asked if he had anything to say. He shook his head in silence. The judge noted that Luna had shown no remorse. On the back of his orange prison outfit, the words "Crip for Life" were written. Prosecutors pointed to this as proof of gang ties and said it supported their view that this was not random. Later, an appeals court reviewed his sentence. They ruled that giving a life without parole sentence to someone under 18 was unconstitutional. His conviction remained, but he was sent back for a new sentencing. As of 2023, Chancey Luna was still in prison, waiting for the resentencing process to be completed. In the next case, what started as a ride among friends would not end the way anyone expected. Tucker Ryan McGee grew up in the small community of Weatherford, Oklahoma. Not much is known about his family or early years. Court records show that he was just 10 days away from turning 18 when everything took a dark turn. In the middle of October 2012, 16-year-old Jere Wilson went missing. People close to her said she had been struggling with her behavior and with substance use in the weeks before she vanished. Her family was worried for her safety, but they had no idea what had really taken place. On October 14th, Jere called McGee and asked him for a ride from Hydro to Weatherford. McGee picked her up, and another friend known as CB came along. During the ride, McGee showed them a small pistol. He made a disturbing comment about what they could do to Jere. CB laughed, thinking it was just a joke. It wasn't. They stopped in a field outside of town. All three smoked a synthetic product often referred to as K2. For more than 2 hours, Jere opened up about her fears. She told them she believed she might be forced into being sold to cover a debt. McGee became frustrated that she kept talking about her troubles. At one point, Jere even texted a friend, saying she felt uneasy. Soon after, while CB was looking at his phone, McGee pointed the gun and fired at Jere. She made a sound, but was still alive. McGee asked why it hadn't ended, then fired again. Instead of helping her, McGee and CB dragged her body to the other side of a fence and placed it under a tree. They then went back to smoking. Later, they tossed her purse and backpack in a dumpster near a car wash. The following day, McGee, CB, and another teen, Caleb McLemore, returned to the field. They buried Jere. McGee found her phone, smashed it, and threw the pieces off a bridge into a creek. To cover their tracks, they told people that McGee had dropped Jere off at some apartments. Flyers were put up all over town. Her family held on to hope for 14 long months. McGee later admitted, "We shouldn't have done that," but never explained why he pulled the trigger. The truth came out only after CB said he had a spiritual moment. He believed God told him to tell the truth. He then led investigators to the area where Jere had been buried. In January 2014, her remains were finally found in a wooded area near Weatherford. The trial started in early 2015. The prosecution presented evidence showing that McGee had aimed directly and acted with intention. An investigator read a letter McGee wrote to his mother, where he said he loved her, wished he could go back, and admitted he was the only one to blame. Investigators also played recorded phone calls. In one, a boy asked McGee if he had gotten rid of the gun, and McGee replied that he had hidden it. Witnesses described how Jere had been treated that night, saying it was heartbreaking. Cody Godfrey, another person involved afterward, admitted to helping cover things up and received a suspended 7-year sentence. McLemore faced charges as well. After 6 days of trial and just 2.5 hours of jury discussion, McGee was found guilty. The jury recommended life without parole, and the judge agreed. In April 2015, that was his sentence. But it did not last. In December 2016, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the sentence. The reason was that McGee had been only 17 at the time, and the law now required courts to consider youth, immaturity, and potential for rehabilitation. Those factors had not been taken into account in the original trial. This was devastating for Jere's family. Her mother said it felt like being dragged back into the pain all over again. A new hearing was scheduled in 2018. In June of that year, McGee was resentenced. This time it was life in prison with the possibility of parole, but only after serving 38 years. Jere's father said it wasn't fair that McGee seemed to get a new break every time, while Jere never had that chance. The next act lasted only minutes, but it left one man lifeless and a 17-year-old facing life in prison. Tremaine Vick grew up in a poor family in Oklahoma. He did not finish high school. In August 2000, he was arrested for his role in a home break-in in Oklahoma City. During that break-in, a 21-year-old man named David Kennedy was shot and later passed away. People who were inside the apartment identified Vick as the one who fired the gun. Vick has always said he is innocent. He went to trial and was convicted of felony charges, including responsibility for the man's passing. The jury recommended life in prison without the chance of parole. Vick is still serving that sentence. He has tried to get a new hearing based on later Supreme Court rulings about young people receiving life sentences, but he has said he does not have money for a lawyer and only limited access to legal resources while in prison. On the night of the break-in, the man and his pregnant wife were visiting family at an apartment in Oklahoma City. Prosecutors said that Vic and at least one other person entered the apartment, pointed a gun at the people inside, and demanded valuables. They argued that Vic fired the shot that caused Kennedy's passing. One co-defendant, Lorenzo Frost, later pleaded guilty to several charges before Vic's trial. At trial, the state relied heavily on eyewitness testimony and a photo lineup done before court. Witnesses said they saw Vic holding the gun and identified him again in court. The jury convicted him of felony homicide, conspiracy to commit a felony, theft with a firearm, 2 counts of threatening people with a dangerous weapon, and pointing a gun at another person. One of the theft convictions was later dropped on appeal, but the most serious conviction stayed. For the main charge, the jury recommended life without parole. So, who tied Vic to the shooting, the witnesses or physical evidence? The case was built mostly on what the people inside the apartment said they saw, along with a sequence of events that matched the state's argument. Court records show the defense challenged the use of the photo lineup and the way witnesses were questioned. The records do not show a major forensic report linking the bullet directly to a weapon owned by Vic. The focus in the trial was mainly on eyewitness accounts and Frost's guilty plea. Vic's trial followed Oklahoma's 2-stage process. First, the jury decided guilt. Then, in a second phase, they decided punishment. During closing arguments, prosecutors made strong statements about the harm done, and the press highlighted the eyewitness accounts. On appeal, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals agreed with Vic on one issue. They said convicting him of 2 arms thefts for the same act was not allowed, so one conviction was removed. But they kept the other convictions and his life sentence in place. Vic later filed federal claims, saying his trial and legal help were unfair. A federal magistrate judge reviewed those arguments and said they should be denied. The district court agreed, and the 10th Circuit refused further review, ending that round of appeals. Meanwhile, legal standards in the United States changed after his conviction. The Supreme Court ruled that people who were children at the time of their actions should not automatically receive life without parole. This opened the door for new hearings in many states. Vic has tried to use those rulings to get a new sentencing hearing, focusing on his young age at the time and his potential for rehabilitation. Reports show he has filed many motions on his own from prison, but without a lawyer or resources. As of 2019, he was still waiting for the state to respond. So why did the jury accept eyewitness testimony instead of Vic's denials? The answer lies in the weight given to the witnesses. Several people placed him at the scene and said he had the gun. The trial court allowed both the photo lineup and the in-court identifications. Appeals courts later reviewed those decisions and did not see them as unfair enough to overturn the conviction. The defense argued that the witnesses were not reliable and also raised concerns about how prosecutors spoke in court. These claims were brought up on appeal and in federal filings, but the courts rejected them. Did the co-defendant testify against Vic? No. Lorenzo Frost pleaded guilty before the trial and did not testify. The prosecution continued its case against Vic based on the remaining witnesses and evidence. Vic's sentence was life without parole for the felony charge of ending a life, plus additional time for the other counts. He is still in custody in Oklahoma. In the years since, changes in law have given people like him new chances to seek hearings that consider their age and potential for change. Vic has worked on this himself, sending motions from prison without a lawyer, but federal courts have denied his previous claims, and higher courts have refused further review. The next case began with a pistol passed around by teenagers, and ended with 2 life sentences in Tulsa. And if you find stories like these important, consider subscribing. Jessel Wilson grew up in Tulsa, in a neighborhood where gang activity was common. From a young age, he spent time with older teens. Some of them trusted him enough to carry a weapon for them. School and police reports showed he already had problems. He was caught with soft substances, trespassed on property, and got in trouble in other ways as a young teen. Life at home was difficult too. At one point, his mother asked the court for protection. She said Jessel had threatened her and acted aggressively in their home. By the age of 13, Jessel was not just a kid getting into fights at school. He was tied closely to older cousins and gang members. They used him for risky jobs. That environment shaped what happened later. When someone that young grows up in those surroundings, it is easy for them to get pulled into choices they do not fully understand. But when Jessel was accused of a very serious act, the Oklahoma courts treated him like an adult. That decision shaped the rest of his life. The event that led to Jessel's conviction happened around New Year's, during the winter of 1996 to 1997. The other person involved was a young man named Mitchell Knighton. At that time, Jessel was holding a .22 pistol for his cousin and friends. According to court records, Mitchell ended up with the weapon after a scuffle at a local gathering. A few nights later, Jessel and others went to Mitchell's apartment to get the weapon back. In that group were Jessel, his 18-year-old cousin Zachary, and at least one more teen. Things became tense inside the apartment. Witnesses later said Mitchell shoved Jessel and made threats. That argument quickly turned physical. Zachary pulled out a gun and fired several shots at Mitchell. Zachary was later convicted as the one who fired and received life without parole. Jessel did not fire the weapon, but his presence and actions that night became the reason for charges that changed his life. Why did a 13-year-old face a charge this serious? According to court records, the group wanted the weapon back. They did not want Mitchell to have it. They also wanted to protect their reputation within gang circles. The plan was to retrieve the pistol, but when Mitchell resisted, things escalated. Jessel admitted being at the scene. He also admitted being part of the plan to confront Mitchell. At first, he denied involvement. Later, he said he fired one shot while Zachary fired twice. Later findings showed Zachary fired the main shots. Still, prosecutors argued Jessel's words and actions made him an accomplice. One reason his case became more serious was that Jessel gave different stories to police. At first, he was treated as a witness. Later, after admitting more, police viewed him as a suspect. This gave prosecutors the chance to file tougher charges against him. For the jury, the question was not only what happened, but also what Jessel intended by his actions. Was Jessel the shooter? No. The evidence and later rulings showed that his cousin fired the fatal shots. But because Jessel was there, took part, and made statements that tied him to the plan, the jury found him guilty too. Why was a 13-year-old tried as an adult? Oklahoma law is strict. If someone that age is charged with first-degree charges in a case like this, they are automatically treated as an adult. No special hearing is required. The law was written that way because of how serious the charge is considered. Because of that rule, Jessel's case stayed in the adult system. Prosecutors first charged him as an accessory. Then they changed the main charge to a first-degree count and added more accessory counts. During trial, the prosecution described the act as a planned confrontation that quickly escalated. The defense stressed Jessel's age, his difficult background, and the fact that witnesses gave conflicting stories. Still, the jury found him guilty of first-degree charges. In July of 1999, Jessel was sentenced to life in prison. His cousin, the one who actually fired the weapon, was already serving life without parole. 2 life sentences, one for the shooter and one for a 13-year-old who played a role, showed how seriously Tulsa courts handled gang-related cases at that time. Jessel did not simply accept the sentence. His lawyers filed appeals. They argued that treating him as an adult and parts of his trial were unfair. Appeals went through Oklahoma courts and later reached the 10th Circuit. Judges had to consider both his young age and the seriousness of the case, but none of the appeals changed his sentence. Years later, Jessel's case came up again during parole hearings. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board suggested parole, but only if Jessel finished vocational training and spent time in work release first. In 2014, Governor Mary Fallin gave tentative approval under those conditions. Reports said Jessel had completed training programs and worked to improve his conduct while in custody. By then, he had already spent more than half his life behind bars and was in his early 30s. Up next is a 15-year-old pulled into gang life who lived with the man he would be his next target. The night was quiet inside the Long family home on May 1, 2000. Officers later explained that Hoyt Long was discovered on the living room couch with several serious wounds. His wife had called emergency services after she heard strange noises in the house. Justin Ryan Long, a 15-year-old boy who had been adopted by Hoyt and his wife, was also found nearby. When officers arrived, he ran from the house. A police dog tracked him down not far away. He was taken into custody and charged with first-degree wrongdoing. Justin had been adopted when he was about 7. His early years were difficult. Reports from his trial and later coverage say that he spent part of his childhood in state custody and in foster care. He was described as having a background marked by mistreatment and by mental health struggles that began very early. When he was still a young child, he reportedly struck another child with a hammer. After that, he was placed in the state care system and moved through several homes in the years that followed. These details appeared often in court documents and in news reports about his case. On the night of the incident with Hoyt Long, investigators said a large kitchen tool was used. Hoyt had multiple wounds from that tool. Neighbors and local papers noted the shock in Duncan, Oklahoma. The community had already seen 2 other family tragedies involving teenagers in recent years, and this case left people deeply unsettled. Police and the district attorney acted quickly to charge Justin as an adult, and the case moved into the Stevens County courts. Why would a 15-year-old turn against the man who raised him? Reports and later legal filings point to layers of trauma in Justin's past. From prison, he wrote letters saying he was an immature kid with emotional problems who never got the support he needed. He said he both loved and hated his father. That showed the relationship was complicated, and not something that could be explained with one simple motive. Court papers and news coverage also pointed to earlier mistreatment and mental health issues. His lawyers argued these factors shaped his state of mind during the incident. Justin's case went through several important steps in the Oklahoma courts. In the end, he was found guilty of first-degree wrongdoing. Records show that he either gave up his right to a jury trial or that the case was handled in a non-jury proceeding in district court. Later appeals questioned whether that waiver was truly knowing and informed, given his age and background. In November 2001, the trial judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, along with later federal filings, described the legal issues raised on appeal. Those included questions about his mental capacity, whether he truly understood giving up a jury trial, and whether he could argue that pressure or his mental health had affected him. Justin's lawyers argued that he had faced severe mistreatment as a child and that he suffered from mental illnesses which left him both immature and impaired. They said the record did not prove he knowingly waived a jury trial or fully understood his rights. The state courts reviewed these arguments. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals examined whether his waiver was valid and whether other issues affected the fairness of the trial. The High Court upheld the conviction and sentence. Later, the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit denied his request for a federal hearing, which meant the state court's decision stood. During the appeals, the record included factual findings about the case: that Hoyt Long was found with fatal wounds in the living room, that Justin was 15 at the time, and that the state presented testimony and evidence to prove first-degree wrongdoing. The district judge gave Justin life without parole, reflecting how seriously Oklahoma law treated the case. The state appellate opinions focus more on the legal questions than retelling the full story, but they consistently noted both the facts of the incident and Justin's young age. Justin has been serving a life sentence since then. News outlets and later reports about juvenile lifers in Oklahoma included him in their coverage. Through the 2010s and into the early 2020s, courts continued to reject his appeals. A federal court order in 2013 denied his request for relief in federal court. State court records also show his conviction and sentence were upheld. By about 2021, public reporting still listed him as incarcerated with no release date. In the next case, 5 family members were gone by morning, and the truth came from a desperate 911 call made by a 12-year-old boy. Michael Bever grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood near Tulsa. He and his siblings were homeschooled. Neighbors later said the family kept to themselves, and the children rarely spent time with others. The household included parents, David and April Bever, and several children. Among them were 2 older brothers, Robert and Michael. They also had younger siblings, including a 12-year-old boy and small children. Neighbors described the family as private. After the events, many admitted they had known very little about them beyond their presence on the street. Friends, teachers, and neighbors had mixed impressions. Some remembered strange behavior from the 2 older brothers. During court proceedings, defense lawyers said the parents were very strict. They also pointed to moments of physical discipline. Prosecutors, however, presented other statements that did not prove ongoing mistreatment. The reality of home life became a major question in the trial, but public records and witness accounts left many uncertainties. In the early hours of July 23, 2015, the 2 brothers turned on their family inside the home in Broken Arrow. By morning, 5 family members had lost their lives due to severe wounds, and another child was left with serious injuries. Those who lost their lives included David and April, along with 3 younger children. A 13-year-old girl named Crystal survived, and later told investigators that her older brothers were responsible. A 12-year-old sibling, Daniel, managed to place a 911 call during the act. That call became central in helping authorities and the public understand what had taken place. Police later found the family members with multiple sharp force injuries and blunt trauma. Reports revealed dozens of wounds on some of them. Investigators also recovered a taped confession and other items that were used in court. The actions had been carefully planned and left the community shocked. Police arrested Robert and Michael soon after and charged both as adults. Robert, being older, pleaded guilty. Michael was only 16 at the time, but was also tried as an adult. Why would 2 brothers act in this way against their own family? Investigators said that during interviews, Michael and Robert spoke about wanting fame. They also mentioned trying to outdo other well-known violent figures. Prosecutors showed evidence that at least part of their planning was tied to a desire for recognition. Defense lawyers argued that Michael's actions were influenced by family dynamics and his mental health. The jury and judge eventually made their decision after weighing all the evidence. Michael's trial took place in Tulsa County after months of hearings. Prosecutors presented physical evidence, the 911 call, and recorded interviews. Robert, who had already admitted guilt, also testified against Michael and described what happened. In the end, the jury found Michael guilty on 5 counts of taking lives and 1 count of harming with intent to end life. The jury suggested a sentence that technically allowed for parole, but the judge later ruled that the life terms would be served one after another. This decision removed any realistic chance of release. At sentencing, the court calculated the total time. The 5 life terms added up to 253 years. Under Oklahoma rules, an inmate must serve 85% before being considered for parole. That came to about 215 years. In other words, while the jury's suggestion left a technical opening for parole, the judge's ruling ensured Michael would almost certainly remain in prison for life. His sentence was later reviewed by higher courts, but it was upheld. Investigators also found notes and statements that showed the brothers wanted a high number of victims and hoped for recognition. There were even reports of plans to target people outside the family. Prosecutors used this to show that the act was not a sudden outburst, but part of a larger plan. Defense attorneys continued to highlight Michael's young age, his state of mind, and the family environment. This conflict between the two narratives shaped the trial. The Bever home was later torn down. In 2017, it burned and was finally cleared away. The community decided to replace it with a small memorial park to honor first responders and those lost. The surviving siblings faced years of recovery and unwanted attention. Robert, the older brother, has since faced more legal trouble in prison. Both brothers remain incarcerated. Local residents said the case left lasting scars on the neighborhood. It also raised questions about how hidden family struggles can sometimes go unnoticed. Deontay Green was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He grew up in a very unstable environment. This shaped his behavior long before his name ever reached the news. Green's background was marked by poverty and instability. He also struggled with behavioral issues. Teachers and neighbors described him as troubled. They said he showed worrying signs even before he turned 16. Instead of focusing on school, sports, or friendships like most teenagers, he turned in another direction. By his mid-teens, Green was already involved in stealing, breaking into homes, and threatening people. His record began to grow quickly. Each new choice became more serious. These actions eventually destroyed several families and placed him in prison for the rest of his life. In 2017, his pattern of behavior grew even worse. Within just a few weeks, he went from committing thefts and break-ins to a spree of disturbing acts that shocked Oklahoma. Some of his early actions that year included armed home invasions. Sometimes he worked with others. He would point a gun at residents and demand what he wanted. He did not hesitate to threaten people, even when children were in the room. Reports later showed that in some cases he also forced himself on others, leaving behind even deeper pain and fear. Many wondered how someone only 16 years old could behave this way. Was it only his environment, or was there something darker inside him? These questions became the focus of the courtroom later. Prosecutors explained that Green knew what he was doing. They argued that his actions were intentional choices, not just the mistakes of a reckless teenager. On October 1st, 2017, his spree reached its darkest point. With a stolen revolver in hand, he went into a Broken Arrow neighborhood near Tulsa. His target was the home of Shane Anderson, a well-liked teacher and father. Green forced Anderson's family inside while pointing the weapon at them. The situation escalated quickly. In front of Anderson's wife and children, Green fired a shot into the teacher's chest. The family watched in shock as their husband and father collapsed. Anderson later passed away from the wound. He left behind his wife and 4 children. Witnesses described Green as calm throughout, showing no hesitation, as if he had crossed a line and could not turn back. That same evening, Green continued his spree. He tried to take another person's car at gunpoint. He fired shots during the attempt, leaving the victim terrified. In that same period, Green was reported to have taken part in a series of break-ins and other misconduct. This was not a single isolated act. It was a series of disturbing events carried out over days. Police quickly identified him as the suspect. Within just a few days, he was arrested. His age shocked the public. 16 years old, yet accused of actions more often seen from hardened adults. The list of charges was long. It included first-degree homicide, armed home invasions, break-ins, and multiple weapon charges. Each charge carried heavy penalties, but the case centered on the loss of Shane Anderson. In court, prosecutors described Green as cold and dangerous. They said he used aggressiveness as a tool to get what he wanted. They argued that his age should not protect him from full responsibility. His defense team tried to argue that his troubled childhood and immaturity played a role. But the emotional testimonies from Anderson's family and other survivors left little room for sympathy. One major question weighed heavily on the case. Should a 16-year-old be sentenced to life in prison without parole? Was there any chance of change, or was it already too late? The jury had to weigh his age against the seriousness of his choices. In 2019, the court gave its decision. Deontay Green was found guilty of the loss of Shane Anderson and of the other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. That meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, growing old in prison instead of experiencing freedom as an adult. Judge William Musselman made it clear that Green's actions had destroyed many lives. The Anderson family's testimony about their pain confirmed the gravity of the decision. They spoke of a husband and father who would never come home again. They described the empty chair at the dinner table that would remain a constant reminder of their loss. The next teenager went from college dreams to row in weeks. Julius Jones was born on July 25, 1980, in Oklahoma City. He was the middle child of 3. His mother, Madeline Davis Jones, raised him along with his older brother Antonio and younger sister Antoinette. Julius was very bright in school. At John Marshall High School, he held a grade point average of 3.8. He ranked number 11 in his class. He earned a partial academic scholarship to the University of Oklahoma. Julius also played basketball and football. His teachers often described him as smart and hardworking. Even with this strong start, his life began taking a different turn as he grew older. He was arrested several times. These included charges for stealing property, hiding stolen goods, car theft, and taking part in armed thefts. Despite this, many still thought his athletic and academic skills could have led him in a better direction. On July 28, 1999, around 9:30 in the evening, businessman Paul Howell drove into his parents' driveway in Edmond, Oklahoma. He had his adult sister and his 2 young daughters with him. As his sister began stepping out of their Suburban, someone with a firearm fired shots. She saw a man wearing jeans, a white t-shirt, a black cap, and a red bandana across his face. Paul Howell was struck. His sister and daughters ran into the house for safety. Paul was later taken to the hospital, but passed away in the early hours of the next morning. 3 days later, officers went to Julius Jones's family home. He was taken into custody. In the attic above his bedroom, investigators found a .25 caliber handgun wrapped in a red bandana. Ballistics showed the firearm matched the bullet that struck Paul Howell and another that hit his vehicle. Officers also discovered clothing, including a shirt, cap, and bandana, that matched the description given by an eyewitness. Julius's acquaintance, Christopher Jordan, was also charged. He admitted to his role and agreed to testify against Julius. In exchange, he received a sentence of 30 years to life, but served about 15 years before release. Julius's family always insisted that he was at home on the night Paul Howell lost his life. They said he ate dinner with them, which included spaghetti and cornbread. Later, they played Monopoly together. They also teased each other about a birthday cookie that evening. Despite this, the trial jury never heard the family's story. Julius's defense attorneys did not call them to testify. Those attorneys later admitted they had little experience handling capital cases. Julius said he wanted to testify himself. He wanted to tell the jury that on July 19th, his hair was cut very short, close to the scalp. The eyewitness, however, had described the shooter as having hair about half an inch long, sticking out from under a stocking cap. His attorneys advised him not to take the stand. A photograph showing his haircut at the time was never presented. Why was the defense so weak? Some later said the lawyers might have been overwhelmed. Others argued it was simply poor representation. The prosecution focused on physical evidence and eyewitness testimony. The bandana found at Julius's home was tested for DNA. Prosecutors argued that the test proved Julius wore it and excluded Christopher Jordan. Advocates, however, countered that the DNA link was weak. The sample showed only 7 markers out of 21, which did not meet law enforcement standards. Traces from multiple unknown people were also found on the bandana, possibly including Jordan. In later years, new testimony came forward. Some said Jordan admitted to another inmate that he was the one who pulled the trigger. They also claimed he planted the gun and bandana at Julius's house to frame him. Concerns of racial bias also appeared in the case. One juror later stated she heard another juror say a racial slur during deliberations, yet that juror stayed on the panel. Julius and his supporters also said a police officer used a racial slur when arresting him. Officials denied this, and courts ruled there was no racial bias strong enough to overturn the conviction. In 2002, Julius was found guilty of first-degree charges and sentenced to capital punishment by an almost all-white jury. Over the next 19 years, his appeals argued poor legal defense, unreliable forensic testing, questionable DNA evidence, possible false testimony, and racial prejudice among jurors. In 2018, his case gained wide attention through an ABC documentary series called The Last Defense. Many public figures, including Kim Kardashian, Dak Prescott, and Baker Mayfield, spoke out in his support. More than 6 million people signed petitions asking for clemency. On November 18, 2021, just hours before his scheduled punishment, Governor Kevin Stitt changed Julius's sentence. Instead of capital punishment, he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. The state parole board had recommended life with parole, but the governor chose the harsher option. Julius's mother described the past 2 decades as a waking nightmare. She said she continued to pray for the Howell family. The Howell family, however, said they felt hurt by the commutation and continued to believe Julius was responsible. Organizations such as the NAACP and ACLU still call for a new trial and point to systemic racism in the case. As of today, Julius Jones remains in prison with no chance of parole. The next 15-year-old would rewrite the law on juvenile punishment. Wayne Thompson grew up in a troubled home in Grady County, Oklahoma. By the time he turned 12, he was already drinking heavily and smoking pot. His school performance was poor, and he was eventually placed in special education classes. He dropped out in 8th grade. The people around him were often involved with heavy drinking or substance use, and many were engaged in unlawful activity. He had very few positive role models. In January of 1983, a man named Charles Keene became the target of Wayne's actions. Charles was married to Wayne's sister Vicky, who was only 15 at the time. According to Vicky and later court testimony, Charles had mistreated her for nearly a decade. She said he often hit her, threatened her life, and even harmed Wayne when Wayne tried to step in. The family also claimed that local authorities did little to help, and that Charles was rumored to have connections with law enforcement. Out of anger and desperation, Wayne decided to act. On the night of January 23, 1983, he joined 3 men: Tony Mann, Richard Jones, and Bobby Glass. Together, they forced Charles into their control in Amber, Oklahoma. Charles tried to run away. He even knocked on a neighbor's door and shouted, "Possum! Open the door! They're going to hurt me!" But the men caught him. They beat him, shot him, cut his throat, tied his legs to a concrete block, and left his body in the Washita River. Wayne later admitted what happened. He came home shaking and soaking wet and told his sister that she wouldn't have to worry about Charles anymore. Not long after, Wayne's sister told the authorities that Wayne had taken care of the problem. Wayne was arrested. He was only 15 years old, but he was tried as an adult in Grady County. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He had kicked Charles in the head, fired a gun at him, cut his throat, and helped leave his body in the river. The jury found him guilty and sentenced him to lose his life through lethal injection. Wayne's case, known as Thompson v. Oklahoma, reached the United States Supreme Court in 1988. The court ruled that it was unconstitutional to carry out such a punishment on anyone under the age of 16. Because of this decision, Wayne's sentence was reduced to life in prison with the chance of parole. In the years that followed, Wayne's co-defendants faced their own outcomes. Bobby Glass lost his life in prison in 1984. Richard Jones was later cleared of charges. Tony Mann stayed behind bars with a life sentence. Wayne, meanwhile, focused on turning his life around. He earned his GED, completed an associate degree, took computer classes, learned to operate forklifts, and began mentoring other inmates. He also struggled with addiction and faced a misconduct incident in 2016. But since 2019, he has stayed sober. From the 1990s onward, Wayne tried several times to get parole. In 2003, the parole board recommended it, but Governor Brad Henry denied the request. Then, in January of 2025, the board voted again, 4-1, to recommend his release. They highlighted his personal changes and the decades he had already served, but required that he complete a 180-day re-entry program first. In April of 2025, Governor Kevin Stitt approved the recommendation. Wayne, now 58 years old, will finish his transitional program. After that, He plans to live with a family friend. His sister hopes he will finally experience freedom again. On the afternoon of July 17, 2015, a drive-by shooting shattered what should have been an ordinary day. 16-year-old Deu Terry was sitting in the passenger seat of her boyfriend's car on West 46th Street North in Tulsa. The gunfire was not meant for her. It was directed at her boyfriend, Jerome Bledsoe, who was sitting beside her. Tragically, the bullet struck Terry instead. She was hit several times. She was rushed to the hospital but did not make it. Bledsoe was also hit, but he survived. Police quickly described the shooting as connected to gang activity. They said the real target was Bledsoe, but Terry became the unintended victim. 2 days later, on July 19th, Tulsa police identified 14-year-old James "Baby G" Napper as one of the people involved. By July 31st, an arrest warrant was issued for him. In December 2015, United States Marshals located Napper in Wichita, Kansas. He was with 18-year-old Lazarick Reed at the time. Both were brought back to Tulsa. They were joined in the case by others, including 18-year-old Donovan Wimberly and Joshua Price. All faced charges connected to the shooting. In July 2015, Napper was formally charged. He faced 3 counts. The first was for the loss of Deu Terry's life. The second was for shooting at Jerome Bledsoe. The third was for a gang-related offense. Oklahoma law allows minors to be tried as adults when facing the most serious charges. Even though Napper was only 14, he faced adult-level prosecution. At that age, a minor cannot face capital punishment, but life in prison was still possible. The preliminary hearing in Tulsa's district court began in early 2016. The process stretched on, with delays and legal motions. By mid-February 2017, the trial was underway. The jury was seated. Opening statements were delivered. Witnesses began testifying. During those courtroom hours, many wondered what pushed a 14-year-old to be part of something like this. The official record only called it gang-related. But that label leaves questions. Was it loyalty, fear, pressure from peers, or something else? On February 17, 2017, the jury gave its decision. Napper was found guilty on the most serious charge. Just 5 days later, on February 22nd, he stood before the judge for sentencing. He received life in prison with the chance of parole. He was also given 55 years for shooting at Jerome Bledsoe. On top of that, he received 5 years for the gang-related charge.